Turned down for what?
So thank y'all so much for coming. I am so happy that you guys are here. This is our first Gym Drop Thursday of 2023. So really excited to kick it off with the one and only John Graham. So John, I don't know if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself so that I don't go overboard, you know?
Yes, so that we don't have to read bios and all that stuff. Nah,
Like
yes.
singer,
Hello, everyone.
songwriter.
Yeah, yeah. Artist formerly known as John Graham. Yes. So it's a pleasure to be with you, Ash, as always. Really happy to be on the kickoff for Gym Drop Thursdays for this year. I'm John Graham, VP of Global Employer Brand Diversity and Culture at Shaker Recruitment Marketing, based out of Dallas, Texas, currently. Author, DEI provocateur, pusher of envelopes and boundaries of comfort, friend to many, brother of many more, only child, father, husband.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
we are digging into a very interesting topic today. And I'm getting an
Mm-hmm.
echo on myself. Let me turn that down a
Turn me down.
smidge. There we go. Um, we will be discussing living and working at the intersection of DEI and EB. And in coming up with this topic, you know, we talked about this and trying to figure out what it would be. What about this topic feels very close to home for you?
Everything, everything. It's interesting. I think I was at this intersection well before the DEI boom, of 2020. And so I'm glad to see that there is movement towards and recognition of the need for this intersection between these two functions within an organization. So yeah, I mean, it feels like I'm right at home because I've always sought to introduce or induce culture and varying cultural perspectives or identity perspectives into brands that I build. So
Okay.
this good. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
so let's jump right in because we have a lot to talk about here. So
Yes.
I'll just start with a quick question. You know, with you working in employer brand, you're at Shaker, you are head of DEI at a recruitment marketing agency. Um, Working in that intersection, how do you approach alignment between talent brand, employer brand, and recruitment marketing teams and DEI?
So I'm gonna answer that through my consultant hat, through the consultant lens, where we try and balance, um, where we want clients to feel confident in is that their employee value proposition, number one, is built on solid research. Um, and that then informs in the way that we do employer value propositions, we approach it through a DEI lens. So that way we're not bolting it onto the back end of a built employer brand. But making sure that the right people are involved in the process from the very beginning. So your chief diversity officers, your chief talent officers, your CHROs, talent development leaders, and so forth, marketing, all of the stakeholders that will effectively be responsible for and accountable for the brand's implementation and execution. Um, that's critical because everybody has their lane, and nobody likes their lane being driven in. But when you think about an employer brand and how it touches every person in an organization, regardless of function, regardless of seniority level or geography, it's critical. So I don't think that there's any disagreement between all of the functions that talent is necessary for an organization to be successful, productive, profitable, and so forth. How you articulate that certainly comes through from a strong EVP, an employer brand that not only articulates what's true about your culture, but also leaves the door open for aspiration. Um, but making sure that you're leaning into the things that you can stand on, that are based in research. You know, staying away from the promises that you can't make or can't keep to a candidate who becomes an employee, and then finding your voice in between the two of those things and bridging that gap between aspiration and reality. And so, yeah, I mean, I think from an employer brand professional's perspective, there's always that dance between the functions and getting everybody to play nicely in the sandbox. But when you start to throw DEI into it, especially when companies have a very strong commitment from leadership, and a demand for increasing representation, you start to see more alignment, especially how the brand gets articulated towards the back end.
Okay. Okay. Now you made an interesting point.
Okay.
And I'm echoing again. I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
But you made an interesting point about companies not making those promises that they can't keep. So it made me think about if you're at an org or company whose culture doesn't necessarily align with the DEI goals, strategy, maybe even the messaging, how would one navigate that, and what strategies could be used to affect change from our talent brand seats that we're sitting in?
Yeah, and that's a really hard question, and I've found myself in that when I was a practitioner internal at companies where you really wrestle with what message you're building or what brand you're building, and knowing what the brand or what the environment or the culture really feels like, and you have to you have to sleep at night, right? So you want to make sure that what you're building is accurate, no matter how much you want to highlight and showcase certain pockets where there's good being done, or even where the cultures are thriving in ERG communities and so forth. But you also want to make sure that what you represent holds up when a candidate becomes an employee, and 6, 8, 12 months down the line, they're not feeling like they were sold a bill of goods, right?
Yeah.
So that's a tough one. So as an employer brand practitioner in organizations that are on their journey from a DEI standpoint, it's critical that you connect and you stay connected with not only your DEI leaders, but also with your talent acquisition leaders, and be the bridge between them. Because you see, there's a lot of DEI programming and initiatives and processes that are being developed that tend not to get the light of day for the most part, because there's no communications organization attached to them. Where employer brand can be a amplifier of all things throughout the company that serve as attraction or compelling pieces to attract prospective talent. It's almost like a perfect marriage. Talent brand can be the amplifier for DEI, and vice versa. And so DEI has programs and initiatives that talent brand can capture for testimonial, storytelling, career site content, all types of stuff. So I'd say, you might not be able to affect change through process and structure and behavioral change per se, but you can start to shape a brand that gets amplified and spread wide and far internally, to get people jazzed about the employer brand and leveraging that content to push out to their networks, or use elevated, inclusive language that's coming through the brand with their referrals, or internal to their networks in ways that otherwise neither functions could have done before.
Okay. So would you say, for a lot of us professionals that are in these companies where we're needing to work with a lot of cross-functional partners, is it valuable for us to kind of almost go on a road show so that people even understand what you do, what employer brand is, what your purpose is in being in the company?
Oh, like that's your first 30 days. When you get into role, your first 30 days is introduction. Who are you? And what is EVP and employer brand? What do these things mean and how do they impact, some of the bigger functions in the organization, but also um, what are you going to see? It's like priming them for what they're going to start to see their employees more on the social channels. They're going to start to see more video. We're going to come and talk to you about your recruitment needs and how we can identify some of your A players or your top performers to be spotlighted, and getting them comfortable with that concept. And depending on the industry, depending on the organizational culture, that could very well be like light years ahead of anything they've done before. And so you have to be the educator, the comfort builder, and then the evangelist, the evangelizer of all things employer brand as well.
Okay, so still more hats to wear. Got it.
I'm sure there's hats.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, once you've navigated, that relationship with DEI, you figure out what strategies you can use to really affect change, get people to understand, who you are, what you're doing, lean into you, work with you. How would one measure the impact of these DEI initiatives on employer brand? And, what metrics should we be looking at? A lot of us are really focused on the funnel, and we think that's kind of like the end all be all, but I don't know if it is.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the holy grail, right? Like to be able to measure the impact and ROI of brand from first touch to hire, right? And then wanting to be able to attribute, your this campaign to that hire is still far in the distance, let's just say. There are ways in which you can back into it. But one of the best ways I would say is first and foremost having a multicultural talent brand. And what I mean by that, that's different than your overarching employer brand. A multicultural talent brand would be specific to the diverse communities that you want to increase representation for. So, a lot of times, and this has happened with DEI in general, it becomes a one size fits all solution for all DEI, like one DEI strategy to rule them all, right? It doesn't work that way. You have to be very conscious and very cognizant of the communities you're trying to speak to, because certain messaging is going to resonate more with this community than it would with this community. And there's relevance and resonance, and you have to be conscious of that. And so I recommend if building a multicultural talent brand, first and foremost, with research within that community or those communities that you want to increase representation for. Leverage that research to then build a brand that's specific to those communities. And now you have material and content that's specific, that's relevant, and can go to the platforms, the right channels for distribution. And now you can start to measure the impacts of your campaigns that are tuned and tailored for those communities. And then you can track them through the funnel. Now, if they don't self-identify, again, that's the ATS conundrum, right? We can bring them to the party, but we're not checking IDs per se once they come in, to the extent or they don't have to show ID. But there's ways in which you can track the efforts if you're partnering with a Blavity for Afrotech activations, or you're working with Professional Diversity Network and hitting up Divine Nine organizations, and you can see, and tag and have analytics on the back end to see and measure the impact of your tailored and specific campaigns.
Okay.
I just gave hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of game away just now.
Now, would you also say that new hire surveys should possibly play a part in that as well.
100%. Yeah, I think the follow up post hire, 6, 8, 12 months down the line, for a couple of things. I mean, one, yes, you want to understand where they came from. Cool. Once they're employees, but then you also want to measure, is what I sold you accurate to your lived experience once you've become an employee? And I think that's how you start to measure not only the impact of your recruitment marketing, but then also the impact or effectiveness of your DEI efforts, of your culture, culture, cultural programming initiatives, and just in general, is our EVP true and resonant for people once they become employees?
Okay. Okay. Now, in your experience, not trying to call anybody old or anything, but you have been, I'm just saying,
And in this game,
while a lot of us are new to this, you sir are true to this. So just wondering if you've ever seen any situations where there's or you can possibly sense tension between talent, brand, and DEI teams.
No, funny, no. The usual, the usual tension is talent, brand, and marketing functions, or talent, brand, and comms functions.
Well,
Right?
yeah, that's just standard.
That's par for the course. That's standard. But no, I have not seen friction between talent, brand, and DEI personally. Where I could see friction, and and I'll throw this back on you. I mean, have you seen that? Because that's unique. I mean, um, where I could see potential friction is if talent brand is moving at a pace that's ahead of where DEI is comfortable with or ready for. What I mean by that is, the major push around DEI is like 3 years old, right? 2020, May of 2020. I'll even get it like July of 2020 forward, because a lot of companies needed some lead time to figure out what they were going to do in response to George Floyd's murder, and then you go from there. But this is still, you're still seeing companies. I mean, I'm still seeing companies who are like, yeah, I think we need to do something about DEI, like in 2023.
Oh,
Cool, right? But they might have employer brand already embedded, might have been there for a few years. So now DEI is coming in trying to figure out their approach, their strategy, what tools they're going to need, how are they going to get the messages out, who they're going to work with, and so forth. And talent brands like, oh, we've got a ton of cultural content. We've been working with ERGs for months, years, whatever. And now you might just be moving faster than the pace that's comfortable for DEI. So there could be that. Or there could be DEI functions that are very well oiled machines that aren't necessarily as communicative about their strategies or initiatives coming up, with their calendar, like whatever the case may be, which could be great content for an employer brand professional who is looking to make those content pieces available not only in the career site but also in social and on-site activations at colleges or campuses, conferences. And then there's no information share, so that's that's also a potential. But yeah, what are your thoughts? Because that's a unique situation there.
I've honestly, I've seen both instances, which is funny that you named those as examples. But so for the, I'm not sure if an employer brand team moving faster than a DEI team on initiatives, partnerships, the things that are needed, has a solve, because I don't think the solve is to slow down. But do you have any advice for employer brand practitioners that are dealing with DEI departments that aren't communicative? And there's apparently all of this DEI magic happening in the background and literally no one knows about it.
That's right. I think it starts with having the right champions in place, not only for your work, but also for a broader talent or people organization work. So your chief people officers who can be a good bridge because they both see the value in DEI and employer brand, right? So assuming that employer brand sits under the chief people organization, chief people officer organization, where if it sits in marketing or if it sits in communications, that it's still forging the relationships at higher levels, so you can get some good conversation and communication at the top of the house, that can advocate for those partnerships between DEI and employer brand. Otherwise, it's really about showcasing how you can add value to what the DEI strategy is looking to achieve. Being that comms function, being a spotlight and an amplifier for their work, which also serves benefit to your work. It's a win-win, but you also have to maybe work within their timing. In certain cases, it doesn't stop you from doing what you're doing, but as long as you're being clear on what you're working on, how you intend to capture certain DEI moments, cultural moments throughout the organization, and how, hey, that content can be used over here as well, but this is what we're doing. If you have any thoughts, and letting them be, allowing them to be thought partners in the process. Maybe there's angles that they would have thought of that we don't. But it's really just about communication first and foremost, and sort of coming with your hands open, like I come in peace. I'm here to help you and the company overall express this message.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like I do think that's good advice. Come in with the helpful heart first, catch more was it bees with honey than vinegar? Is that what my grandma used to say?
That's right. Yes, indeed.
So when it comes to showcasing a company's commitment to DEI, how can us in these EB chairs incorporate diverse perspectives and experiences into our employer branding efforts? And then what strategies can be used to continue to showcase that commitment to DEI through those EB efforts?
So that's a tough question to answer, and the reason why I say it is because there's like this. It's not a debate within the in the industry of employer brand or DEI right now, but it's something that I'm seeing a lot, and a lot of DEI practitioners and chief diversity officers are very aware of this. It's easy to throw up the right ratio of diverse demographics on a career page or in a Facebook ad.
That's the commitment, right? That's we proved it. We put up the stats.
And the things. Here's the thing.
They match the demographics of the country. We did it. Right?
Right. We went to Afrotech this year. We did. Well, the challenge there is everybody does that, right? So how are you, number one, how are you differentiating? Number two, what is the line between articulation and expression versus exploitation? Right. So we can put all of the images here, we can tell all the stories, but if you're not answering the question, are we actually improving the lived experiences of the marginalized communities that we're showcasing? Then we're not then we can't honestly say that this is an exploitative, right? And so when it comes to being an employer brand practitioner, it's a very tough lot, it's a tight rope to walk, to where you're showcasing the culture, but you're doing so in a way that is done in dignity, that adds humanity. And it also adds a different narrative than just look at our diverse employees. What is the impact of their work, not only on, for a company's benefit? How is this helping them personally outside of work? How is the organization supporting their endeavors in mental health, in being a caretaker, right? Things that actually showcase who they are beyond just an employee number with a badge, right?
Yes.
And then the DEI collaboration kicks in the showcase, here's where we know we have gaps. And with these specific communities, because we've done the research, we've done the data, and we're transparent about that. Here's what we're doing to bridge those gaps, mitigate those points of bad lived experience, poor lived experiences within our organization. And here's how we're partnering with our communities within the organization to do so. Like, that's a different story. And I think that's where the future of employer brand comes in. I've often said, like, authenticity is beat to death. Like, everybody's throwing that word around. And when I say, I'll do this with you. When I say authenticity, Ash, what comes to mind immediately when you think about employer brand authenticity recruitment marketing?
Transparency.
See, you're too advanced. I shouldn't ask.
Okay, what should have come to mind then?
Let's poll the audience.
Well, yeah, that's excellent. So
yeah, let's ask the audience.
So when I say audience,
what do you think? What comes to mind? Just throw out like one or two words that comes to mind. First thought.
And we will sit here and wait. Yes.
I'm gonna say overused. The word, not about not in detail, but when I see that, honestly, it gives me the ick sometimes.
Right. Why so, Crystal?
I don't know, man. It's just one of those things that I don't know, maybe it's overused, or maybe the people who are talking about it, I just wonder, do you even know what that means?
Almost like the word woke, right? I won't take your program in there, Ashley. Sorry. But to that point, authenticity is overused. The meaning has been watered down and diluted. So what I suggest is the future of authenticity is also transparency. And that's something that is rarely explored when we're talking about culture content, when we're talking about DEI journeys, because nobody wants to showcase their warts, right? Like, sometimes you got an ugly baby and you just need to say it, right? But that's cool. They're going to grow into their teeth and their face, whatever. but in all seriousness, transparency is the thing that candidates are looking for more so than any other content you're putting out there. But yes, salary is important, cool. But I want to know, what am I going to deal with on a day-to-day basis that you're not telling me? And I'm only going to find out 3 months into my role, or 6 months into my role, or the manager that was hella cool in my interview takes a new job 3 weeks into my role. And now
I hate when that happens.
Right? And these are the things that shape your lived experience as an employee that then create negative brand sentiment that gets put out on Glassdoor, thrown up on LinkedIn. And now you as an employer brander are working against your own internal employer brand negative sentiment. So you might as well just be transparent up front, say who we are not. And for those who rock with who we are, come join us. And if you don't rock with who we are, cool, don't apply. There's no problem with compelling the few and repelling the many, but that's new age think in employer brand.
Is it really? Because as someone who contributed to the Give and the Get, is it really new age, or is it something that we should really be digging more deeply into?
Yeah,
because it's just that important, and maybe that was ahead of its time.
I dare say Bryan Adams and Charlotte Marshall were ahead of their times with the Give and the Get. I've started to hear people ask for that approach. But again, these are people who are practitioners in the employer brand space and are up on trend. But for the most part, especially the bigger companies, still only want to sell the champagne and the roses. Mm. Let's hide some of the ugly stuff, because we don't want it to impact consumer brand, right? And that's a thing. So it also plays against you, because if you think about bigger companies like, I don't know, Apple. I mean, and we've all been to conferences, right? So if we have our booth and then we look at like Google, maybe this is pre-pandemic, but whatever, Google, Amazon, Apple, big FANG companies, you see lines around the block for them to roll up. But when you know that as an employer culture, I don't know, should you be lining up? Especially if you are from certain communities. And this is no, disclaimer, I have nothing against any of the companies I mentioned, but when you understand the employer culture versus the consumer brand representation, you start to have a different conversation. That's all. So transparency, I think, is the future there.
Yes, and I do truly hope a lot more companies lean into that, because I really believe it's so important not to sell people snake oil, because it just adds to your retention if you're telling the truth. It's like, let me decide if I want to be abused.
Look, it's that hold up, that hit my spirit. Hold on. I need an opt out first, but that's real. And I think that's a really good point, though. And I think that employer brand professionals and recruitment marketers of attrition mitigation and reduction as well. Because what you're putting out there, right? If it's good, if it's solid, if it's true and accurate, and it's culturally honest, then you should also be bringing in more talent that will stay longer, because they weren't shocked and surprised on the back end, right? Theoretically. Now, you're never going to account for for that middle management layer, the frozen middle, who didn't get the DEI memos or deleted them as soon as they saw DEI in them. You're never going to account for that as an employer brand. And again, your job is always just going to be to get people in the door. Once they're here, we always say it's everybody else's job to keep them in the party. Mm-hmm. Well, if you're not lying about what's in the party, or saying Jay and Beyonce are at the party and you get in and it's not Jay and Beyonce, then yes, you have a part to play in not only the pretenses of why people join an organization, but also selling the relevant pieces and reasons to believe that keep them there.
So true. Crystal, did you want to come off mute?
Yeah, I had a question. I had a question. Here's my dilemma sometimes. People have different, even within groups, we have different experiences. So I've had experiences. So I feel super supported in my role. We are starting. I'm starting the Latin ERG finally. And when I talk to other people, they're like, yeah, well, I feel not supported at all. And, and I don't feel supported as a person of color. I don't feel supported as this. And so how do you account for, I know everybody has an individual experience, and I want to be authentic, transparent, all those things. And I really do try. And I think it does come across without hopefully tokenizing any of us. But at the same time, we do have different experiences. And I know that there's people in certain groups who have really terrible ones, and in certain groups who have great ones, right? So how can you account for those as you're telling those stories? I'm curious, because I find that a lot, especially because we're all around the world. We've got big offices in Hungary and Guatemala, here in Canada. It's just a whole different ball game too, outside of the US. So I'm curious to your thoughts on that.
That's a fantastic question, Crystal. I will say you're always going to find variance in the anecdotal, meaning if you can get enough research and a broad enough clip to where you can make some very strong generalizations based on what you've uncovered through research and data, then that, I think, is a good, solid foundation to stand on. You're never going to account for everybody's individual experience, and I don't think it's fair or reasonable for anybody to ever ask you to. And so when you can build enough trust and credibility in the brand that you've articulated, based again on research, then people from within those communities, now your job is evangelizing, right? To get people to embrace it along with you, and then amplify and distribute. And that's how you build that trust. So it's not just the company saying it, right? And that's a whole nother conversation. But it's people within the organization having individual experiences that align to this broader messaging that's been created with them in mind. That's the other part, right?
Now, to that subject,
Mhm.
how, if it's even possible, do you take those stories, those instances, those experiences where people are feeling supported, they are feeling what you sold them to bring them in? How do you leverage that to get the rest of the company, the frozen middle, to really get on board?
You, as employer brand leader in your organization, don't do that alone. That is the coalition building that comes with this work. And I think, look, to the advantage, because we have access and connectivity to every function based on the work we do, because it resides around talent and culture, it gives us a bit more cachet to get meetings with leaders that sometimes even our own managers don't get. That's where you build the relationships and that uh, support and advocacy from people in very prominent places that can now tap in with that frozen middle. And it's a little bit different energy when, an SVP is hitting up, director, senior director, and saying, "Hey, I need you to work with, Ashton, because she's doing a really strong initiative around hiring talent, especially in diverse communities that we need to increase representation in. And so I'd be looking for you to take meetings and move projects forward." So, I mean, this is a highly political role, and I don't think we as employer brand managers recognize how much power we have, but also how much access we get and what we can do with that if we choose to use it, uh, correctly. I think.
So, and I'm glad you brought up access,
Yeah.
because there was one thing you said not too long ago that, we as employer brand practitioners have a responsibility to hold the mirror up to the company.
That's right. That's right.
How do we do that?
Well, you call me. No. I think, look, in all honesty, I think you do need an outside objective third party to come in and do that deep dive research to build your EVP. Your employee value proposition is the mirror to your executive leadership team that's going to show you exactly who you are as a company culture, because it's through the voice of your employee bases of varying function in various functions, varying seniority levels and geographies. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat on like EVP research report readouts with CEOs and their leadership team, and they have like this different idea of what they thought they would have heard from their employee base versus what's reality. And so that opportunity to sort of shed some light on some things that executives, because their experience is quite different than somebody on the front line or in the middle, is a necessary one, because then that opens doors for more advocacy that probably wouldn't have been there before, because now you have data and the people have told you exactly who they think you are versus what brand image you present for other areas of your business. And that I think is an invaluable experience that then opens the door for the brand expression to come and speak to those things in a more consistent way.
Okay. So what you're saying is don't use ChatGPT to do my EVP.
No.
I'm just okay. Just asking. Everybody's talking about ChatGPT could do everything. So
it's funny. It's funny. We played with that to see what it spits out, because of course people are going to try those things, right? But there's no surrogate for collecting and having conversations. ChatGPT is not going to do your focus groups, right? They're not going to do your interviews with your leadership. They might be able to transcribe and analyze your transcript and so forth. But okay, cool. But you still have to have a human touch to really discern those key elements and those themes and those things that are important to employees that candidates should be aware of, that other employees within the organization should be aware of that they might not have put their finger on since they've been there. So yeah. Tech is only a tool, not a replacement.
Okay. Just checking. So let's see, what else can we jump into now? Well, before I continue, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to put on? Here we go. They couldn't even finish my sentence.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on DEI versus affirmative action, and how do we overcome the stigma? See, I never thought of it as a versus. I thought the two always had to work hand in hand, but
so okay.
Talk to me. I'm young. I'm new to this.
Let's go there.
You know.
It's a great question. So, all right. So affirmative action, that is the grandfather of DEI. You know, and it's still very much, it's funny how representation has now come full circle, which essentially means we need to hire more of X demographic because we have low representation. Now that could impact government contracts, right? Companies might have different motives for wanting to increase representation, because I always ask for anybody, any company that asks me, says, hey, you know, we need to increase representation for Black and Latina and women in tech. I'm like, okay, why? And you'd be surprised how quickly crickets come in. Well, you know, our data says that we're low on representation. Okay, cool. So let's say you hit that number of increase of 30%, then what? And I tell people, representation is a weak metric. It only tells you how many of the people are here. It's not a measure of the health of your culture, right? So let's not conflate what representation is and is not. Let's be honest about what that's going to do. It's a great vanity metric. Let's be honest. It's something you can tout in your ESG report. It's something you can tout in your CSR report. But today's expression of DEI, and this is me as a DEI consultant, but also as a Black professional, you're starting to hear DEI be used as a dirty word, right? Because we went really hard for the past 3 years. And those who are in power dominant or power majority positions are like, we've done all the things. What else do you want? So you're starting to see pullbacks. You've seen DEI or chief diversity officer roles and DEI related roles be cut faster than any other role in the job market, just in the past year alone. You're starting to see budgets for those who are retaining their DEI functions. The budgets are getting slashed. And this, you know, okay, anything that's not producing revenue is going to be on the chopping block. I get it. But then there's also the sentiment that we're spending too much time talking about race and sexual orientation and gender identity and all these things. Why can't we just come to work? And so these are the sentiments that are still holding true change back. I take a different approach to it, though. And I think the second part of that is, how do we overcome the stigma? Well, I think the key word there was overcome. What I question as a DEI provocateur is, are we fighting for the right thing? And controversial take here, should we be fighting to change organizations that we don't own, or should we be fighting to create more organizations that we own? That's a different conversation, right? Additionally, we've used the same tactics now for the last 60 years, right? Civil Rights Act 64 forward, boom. We're almost at 60 years. Can anybody say, and this is a question that I ask Black ERGs when I do speaking engagements, all the commitments, all the money, all the headcount, elevated positions, and so forth that your company has made and done, have you seen a material improvement to your daily lived experience as a Black professional in this organization? 9.9 times out of 10, the answer is no. So then you start questioning, okay, cool, all of those tactics look great, but who were the intended beneficiaries of the work? And that's a question that doesn't get asked, right? All of these things, but who are we intending to benefit? Well, you can't say one group. You could, and all your data points to you should, but they won't. And so this is where you get back into the circular argument of, are we fighting for the right thing? I don't have the answer of how we overcome. If I did, I would be a multi-billionaire right now. I suggest we need to probably have different conversations and ask better questions of ourselves in these marginalized communities of what should we be fighting for.
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation.
But
Crystal does ask a good question. Doesn't that vanity metric matter? You know, the more representation, the more likely that increased sentiment is there, simply because there are more of us present in the room every day.
Theoretically, representation matters when representation also has authority, power, control of budget, right? And I don't see that happening. In fact, so much so that most companies who are seeking to increase representation are looking to do so at executive levels. So most companies' representation stops at the manager or director role and below, right? So you see the heaviest amounts of representation at the lowest levels in organizations. So does representation matter? Yes. And when they have power, authority, autonomy, and so forth, and control of budgets.
Absolutely.
I often say the NFL and the NBA are the highest instances of Black professionals, but would we say they're the paragon of inclusion and equity? No. And then as a historian, I always fall back. I did write a book called Plantation Theory.
I should have had it right here so I could do the Vanna White.
You know, representation in your labor force then doesn't mean it was equitable, nor was it inclusive. So these are the conversations. Again, certain things sound good, but when you really peel back the layers and you do the research on these things, the question is, who are the intended beneficiaries? And so what we've seen up to this point is the companies are the biggest beneficiaries because they're vanity metrics. Yes, you might have some more people in the room. And I'm only going to belabor this point, Crystal, just for a second, because there's also something that I talk about when I do speaking engagements with Black ERGs, and there's a session I do called The Cost of the Climb. This all relates to employer brand, by the way. Don't. But the cost of the climb, I talk about. I ask a question: do you know what's behind the doors you're knocking on? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you don't, right? But we've been coded and charged to chase this ascending ladder. What you find is, and I'll use the Black community specifically, in the history of the Fortune 500, you've only had 27 Black CEOs, right? And they've been doing the Fortune 500 since 1966. 27. So when you think about all 27 of those, and I've had conversations with a few, the thing they regret having to give up is their cultural identity expression to get behind those doors. And if you are tapped to lead or installed or put in place to lead, it's not because you're going to dismantle the status quo. It's because you have been deemed a good steward of status quo. In fact, we believe you could further the status quo even better for profitability and bottom lines or imagery or whatever. So the construct will never implant its own demise, right? So representation is a vanity metric. It's a like, it's a click, it's a view. Change doesn't come just by one person rising or ascending, right? You have to see a lot of change. And I don't know that companies are the vehicle to see the change we're also talking about, by the way. That's a whole other conversation.
Okay. So this got deep real fast. We are actually. And since we are, and we did all that, I'm going to go to my red question, which is, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in pursuing a career that sits at this intersection of talent, brand, and DEI?
Oh, I have a really good therapist. No, I'm joking. Seriously.
No, mental health is important. So everybody needs therapists, so go and get one anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I would say two things. The first thing being, if you have a passion for really connecting humanity to industry or humanity to the concept of work, then that is a great starter, right? A great attribute to have to pursue this work. And I get a lot of hit ups through LinkedIn about, from people who want to make the pivot or transition from a marketing role or a DEI role into employer brand. And I say you can learn a lot of the skills to be an effective recruitment marketer, employer brand builder. But when you want to add in the lens of DEI to that work or humanity based work into the employer brand, then that requires, I think, first and foremost, a very thorough understanding of the construct in which you're in, historically, understand the industry, understand how the industry or the organization that you are working with or for contributes to the good as well as the bad, right? Understand the light and the dark of anything you're going into. And then get educated, just like with all things. If it's new to you, there are tons of resources out there around effective development of EVP, employer brand. There's even certification programs that have popped up now to become, certified or credentialed in this space. The second part is from a DEI standpoint. I think, and this is interesting because I think that DEI practitioners who are facing a lot of those brick walls they're running into, if you are a talent brander and a DEI professional, you actually have a bit more job security. And I say that because DEI can be turned off the moment a company says, oh, it's not working or we've done enough, but you never turn off talent. You always need people. And you always have to recruit, right? And differentiating position. And the brand needs to be refreshed every 3 to 5 years. So you might as well take on that additional, skill set to get a bit more job security.
Very true. Very true. Okay. I mean, that's something I saw all the time. Businesses always need two things: customers and talent.
That's right.
That's about it. Okay. So don't want to tell y'all to log off yet, but I'm going to go ahead and thank John for this amazing conversation, a much needed conversation, and thank all of you for definitely joining us and participating in this conversation with us. And I invite you to stay with us as I end the recording, but I'm going to say that thank you for joining our live. And if you're interested in joining us on stage for the next discussion, please feel free to reach out to me. And also be on the lookout for more events coming from Black and Brown and Employer Brand LinkedIn group. So if you're not already a part of that LinkedIn group, I would say go ahead and go search for it. And go ahead and click that you want to be in there so I can go ahead and approve you. But yes, thank you all so much for this. I'm going to